Vice won't exist in 5 years. Here's why. Why is Moon so mauled?
Find more videos with that lady in it. She was a good host.
Right now,
She's a good host. Yeah, I think she's pretty good. She has a good amount of self-awareness and shit.
Vice is currently collapsing. Once estimated to be worth almost $6 billion, Vice is now being slammed by its major investors like Disney, who claim that their investments in Vice are now completely worthless. Which isn't much of a surprise considering the huge drop in quality of Vice's content. And as a result of this, Vice is failing to hit any of its expected revenue goals. In fact, the main content on Vice is now flopping. The key journalists and founders behind Vice's golden years have now abandoned ship, and it seems like the passion behind Vice is just completely dead. Which begs the question, what went so wrong for Vice? Well, weirdly, it was almost destined from the start. You see, Vice always relied on its edgy content to bring in viewers. It was the core of Vice's entire business model. It's fair to say that back in the 90s, the media was nothing close to what it is today.
And then they did like a really weird hipster cringe, like druggy interview line in all of the other ones too.
Vice would pride itself on reporting stories that were actually on the cutting edge of what was deemed socially acceptable in society. The magazine would publish topics ranging from anti-establishment pieces, political hit jobs, drug romanticization, and even articles like The Vice Guide to Shagging Muslims. With headlines like these, it was no wonder why Vice started catching the eyes of young adults and investors alike. And because of this, throughout the 2000s, it was all smooth sailing for Vice, and you can see this by looking at the search volume for Vice. By looking at this graph, it's clear that Vice was unstoppable. It was one of the most searched things on the entire internet back in the early 2000s, signing multi-million contracts with MTV and expanding ever more across the internet.
I had no idea.
With all of this growth being fueled by Vice's edgy material, something that was hard pressed to come by back in the day. Some of their earlier shows would reach widespread acclaim, like their amazing series The Vice Guide to Travel, which featured documentaries around the axis of evil, North Korea, Iran, and the Pakistani gun markets. But this was only a small slither of the real content on Vice, because the bulk of Vice's content was still on its website. To stand out from all the other media companies, Vice would always write articles on edgy topics with clickbait titles. By doing this, Vice was able to garner tons of attention. If you saw one of their articles on why all masculinity is toxic, or if you felt angry after reading their article of the trend of gender diversity among plane hijackers, or if you felt disgusted by sex with bugs, drinking vaginal juice, and men with fart fetishes, you would then spread this around. People would begin talking about this content, and this was one of the key reasons why Vice was able to garner so much attention. The way it took over mainstream culture was very similar to Andrew Tate's rise to fame, and because this was so successful, the company began focusing almost entirely on content they deemed to be edgy, whether the material was actually good or not. Because fundamentally, this is what got clicked.
Why is it censoring it now when there was a full bullet on the left side?
Paid off, as seen with the insane volume of search traffic Vice Media was gaining, and with the search traffic came huge multi-million-dollar investments. However, this content strategy was a double-edged sword, because you see, back in Vice's golden years, their clickbait garbage was balanced out by their groundbreaking documentaries, which gave Vice a good reputation in some corners of the internet.
They had good documentaries though, no joke
shows
though.
like The Vice Guide to Travel and Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. Vice would still use clickbait titles for these documentaries, but then this would be backed up by high-quality
what is this?
documentaries.
It looks like a Jordan Peter or whatever.
Journalist deep dives by masters of the field. Like, for example, the scientist Hamilton Morris, who created one of Vice's most popular columns, Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, back in the early 2000s, where Hamilton would write articles about all kinds of drugs. But the problem was that this content was just so much harder to make, not to mention a lot more risky, because for every Hamilton Morris, there were countless other Vice journalists who weren't bringing in the cash or attention that Vice needed to sustain its constant expansion. To fund these documentaries cost enormous amounts of money, but if Vice could still generate enough clicks and attention through cheap clickbait articles by undergrads talking about fart fetishes, then why not capitalize on this? Because at the same time of Vice's golden years, BuzzFeed's booming clickbait factory was skyrocketing. It seemed like this formula was the best road to go down, and so Vice would continue down this path. Instead of producing the eye-catching and actually edgy videos that they were known for, Vice would then instead pump out clickbait, lukewarm articles and videos. Vice was beginning to take the easy way out and started laying out the groundwork for coasting along merely on their reputation of being edgy, relying on their built-up reputation from their good documentaries to sustain their content factory farm. But while this issue was starting to become increasingly apparent to those paying attention, this didn't mean that Vice was actually losing any traction. In fact, many of their most popular videos would be released around this time frame.
Yeah, see, that's when I watched Vice, right here. this
early
period.
2010s,
maybe a little bit
documentaries like The World's Scariest
later.
Drug, The UK's Scariest Debt Collector, An Underground LSD Palace, and The Suicide Forest in Japan. All of these videos contain really interesting topics that appeal to a wide audience, with all of these videos reaching tens of millions of views. This content was still living up to the quality standards that Vice was somewhat known for, with their most groundbreaking documentary being This Is What Winning Looks Like. Released in 2013, Vice's film tackled a subject of the Afghan war that no other mainstream media outlets would dare to talk about. The documentary focused on the issues of rampant sexual abuse.
Wait. Toes of what? Slide toes at 9:30. Okay, thank you.
Towards adolescent boys that was prevalent among the Afghani police force. But while everything seemed perfect on the outside, Vice was now beginning to rot in the inside. 2013 would be the first year where Vice's underlying problems reached a breaking point, and this problem began with their shareholders. You see, with all of Vice's growth, new investors, managers, and employees played a significant role in changing Vice's content focus. Because of this, one of Vice's co-founders, Gavin McInnes, saw this growing issue and left the company years earlier in 2008, well before things started getting really bad. Gavin stated during his departure that the expanding influence advertisers were getting over their content was not something he wanted to deal with. He knew this clickbait factory path was going to ruin all the credibility and reputation Vice had worked so hard to build. And it turned out that Vice's main editorial board and the advertising executives...
Oh, he's a bad guy. Okay, sorry. I mean... Oh, don't say that? I mean, I said better to the move because, I mean, if the company sucks, leaving the company is a basic move. What about it?
Time, and Gavin had finally gotten sick of it.
That was my word, idiot.
Things to come. Because what was even worse than the co-founder's departure was that big media moguls like Rupert Murdoch would soon be injecting millions into Vice, with Rupert Murdoch specifically injecting 70 million into the company. Now, for those who don't know, Rupert Murdoch is a billionaire who has centralized ownership of hundreds of publishing outlets, such as the Wall Street Journal, The Sun, The Times, Fox News, and many others.
Invested
heavily into Vice around 2013, and only a year later, Vice would then receive even more investments from another power-hungry media giant by the name of Disney, who purchased 10% ownership of Vice during 2014, and later gained an even further share of around 20% after another investment in 2015. And this was great for the short term, allowing the Vice co-founder Shane Smith to become a billionaire. But in the long term, this was disastrous. This all seemed too good to be true, and that's because it was. Little did anyone know what was coming for Vice over the following years. But before we continue, I want to tell you about today's sponsor.
But the company makes like videos and documentaries or whatever. So invest in what? Having more people on the field, making fund more journeys or whatever. 400 million worth of documenting.
It turned out that the co-founder of Vice, Shane Smith, had been lying about Vice's real value all throughout the company's entire history. Shane had been consistently overblowing the potential of his media outlet, and using his early skills as a salesman, successfully fooled many of its investors. That's why you'll be hard-pressed to find any kind of data or statistics regarding Vice's value or popularity, because even the people who owned and invested in the company didn't actually know its true worth. Since the company's founding, Vice has done everything
Does anybody ever know, though, in tech or
investors eventually found out, they soon realized what was going on and called for drastic measures. They needed money now because Vice was failing to hit any profits. Each year they were below their targets, and with this rapid pile-on of major corporate investors, Vice had to do something fast. So the first and easiest way to make money was to get more advertisements. However, advertisers weren't particularly fond of being associated with controversial and edgy political topics, which was Vice's core premise. And so in order to meet the demands of investors, Vice would need to change their content to appease the advertisers to appease the investors. So Vice's first move would be to sanitize their content, and it was this kind of short-term thinking that would be detrimental to Vice. Instead of journalism that was priding itself as being on the edge of what was socially acceptable, Vice was now getting sanitized by the investors who were supposed to be helping the company succeed. Although by posting these cleaner videos, Vice wasn't getting the same kind of positive reception that their older videos received. So much so that a lot of people started asking questions about it. Many began asking why the Vice they once knew was now getting bombarded with dislikes, seemingly out of nowhere. From 2015 onwards, there were forum posts after forum posts discussing the fall of Vice's content. They went from making genuinely good documentaries from dangerous locations to overhyping ordinary stories to try and get more viewers. I really liked the content. It was good and hard-hitting, but then it all went to shit. They're trying too hard to stay hip and cool and underground. The quality of Vice's videos seems to have dropped, and several of their headlines are nothing more than clickbait. Furthermore, Vice's
I don't even agree with this. I mean, I don't mind them being cool, hip, and underground if they do it right. If they fuck it up, it's bad. It's forced.
Seems to have dropped,
but that's their main content before. It was always hip, cool, and underground.
Furthermore, Vice's clickbait content would continue to erode all the reputation it had once built. The
9:30 to
clickbait factory was turning in on itself. BuzzFeed was facing the consequences, and now Vice was too. Relying on these crappy videos like single Japanese women buying the boyfriend experience and Pussy Riot gets whipped in Sochi to get anywhere near the sorts of views they used to get 10 years before. And while Vice has always used at least some amount of clickbait, this empty content was now beginning to get on people's nerves. And by just simply taking a glance at the
9:30?
state of the channel's most popular uploads, this decline in Vice's content
your timer. 9:37 to 10:10 and then 11 to 11:20.
quality is extremely clear and apparent. Medically assisted sex branching their attention towards different channels, a decision that would also compound to cripple the company even more. Because Vice's attention wasn't only focused on their clickbait factory, they were now focusing on so many other channels. Vice Munchies, Vice News, Vice Sports, Vice Life, and all the others eventually began popping up out of nowhere. And whilst this might have been good on the surface to generate more revenue, these ventures detracted from Vice's core channel, while also causing their intended audience to spread themselves even thinner. It seemed like the shareholders were overwhelmingly out of touch when deciding where to take Vice as a media outlet. If someone wanted to watch videos on food or sports, there were hundreds of other channels to get to.
If somebody's gonna go and interact with the Vice content for the first time, you want them to get a heavy hitter video or some dog shit fucking hamburger.
Better, a more focused perspective instead of watching
it's
it on
tough,
Vice.
you know, like
this decision to bring about other channels made Vice just look like another typical media outlet instead of the edgy organization that once reported on things that no one else would even touch.
11, right?
And so unsurprisingly, this
xQc reacts. Hey, slow down, man. Slow down. We only did that. Okay, because people were schmalding about fucking full gameplay videos and shit.
Would start to pull out of the company. All the CEO of Vice's rhetoric about pay Vice to join its youth revolution or get left behind, and his claims of having a monopoly on the young adult audience was now slipping through Vice's fingers. In fact, Vice reported themselves to somehow be worth a whopping 5.7.
Guys, believe it or not, guys, that people stopped uploading on their main channels on YouTube, full gameplay videos, since like fucking like the early 2010s. It's like old news, man. Just how it is. It fucks the algorithm because of watch time and shit like that.
$1 billion at one point, and stated that they would later be worth $50 billion by the end of the decade. Unfortunately for Vice and its investors, the supposed influence and value they had was so unrealistic and absurd that Vice's house of cards is now tumbling into the ground. You see, Vice's overblown value claims have left the company out to dry multiple times.
You're wrong,
As an example, only 1 year after claiming to be worth billions, Vice missed their annual revenue target by $100 million, all to the displeasure of the company's investors. This wasn't the only time that Vice has inflated their market value either. In 2021, Vice was planning a special purpose acquisition company merger with 7GC, a deal valued at nearly $3 billion, but the arrangement ended up...
What about PK and Mr. Beast? My brother, they don't post 10-hour playthrough videos. Mr. Beast is going on his main channel. On Mr. Beast's new video, it's him playing Far Cry for 12 hours. He doesn't do that.
Falling through.
He don't
this
do that,
was
bro.
a disaster
What
for
is
Vice,
this
as this attempted merger was the only way that Vice would make up for the lost revenue. This merger would have built a bridge to, quote, figure out something, a phrase highlighting just how lost Vice was and what to actually do with the company. This whole ordeal ended up causing the chairman of Vice to relinquish even more of his voting control and forced him to spread it even further amongst investors, with the investors dragging down Vice, now having more power and influence over the company's operations. And with shareholders like Rupert Murdoch and Disney controlling Vice, it's not hard to see why the company began aiming more towards safer content instead of the edgy material that made them popular in the first place. And in all honesty, what are these investors supposed to do with Vice in its current state anyways? There might be a clearer direction if the news outlet was based on a single channel, but there are just so many sub-stories to worry about as well. The only thing that Vice can really do to redeem itself is to go back to the kind of edgy content they were always known for. But if that
this is I feel like it's a content box that's exhausted very fast.
That's the case. What are they doing with Vice Sports and Munchies? These channels are all flopping apart from Vice News.
So
the company is essentially trapped in a never-ending cycle of cleaning their content, disregarding their audience, losing money, and in turn being forced by investors to further clean their content. While at the same time, investors keep squeezing as much money from their workers as possible. The company now being forced by investors to employ the self-imposed 20/20 rule. Hire 22-year-olds, pay them $22,000 and work them 22 hours a day, resulting in even lower quality content as Vice's clickbait factory goes into the ground. Because of this, it's not very surprising that Vice's original employees are now leaving the organization to start their own ventures instead. Vice's key journalist and beloved...
These like this drug and this market and this drug and that at one point, the manufacturing, the job of it, at one point you run out of drugs, man. At one point you run out of whatever. You run out.
Would soon no longer be available, as he would end up terminating his Pharmacopoeia series
and
employment of Vice a few years later in 2021. And even worse, the original co-founders behind Vice, the guys who made some of the best content Vice has ever done, have now all taken big steps back from making any documentaries. And when looking at the condition of the company today, it's clear to see that there is just no passion left in their audience, investors, or the employees themselves, which became all too clear when Disney went on record and actually publicly stated how poor a decision it was to invest in Vice, claiming investing $400 million in the company was one of the worst mistakes they've ever made, with Vice's profitability taking a steady nosedive almost exactly when Disney started putting funds into the company, causing Disney to recently announce that they no longer believed there would ever be a return on investment for their shares in Vice. It's so bad that Disney's total initial investment into the company has now been drained so badly that they've lost $353 million in Vice. And to pour salt in the wound, with
what are they spending on, dude? What are they spending on?
$157 million of this being officially written off. And if it couldn't get any worse for Vice, their core audience, who were looking for edgy material, have all but abandoned ship, as the YouTube stats and Google search trends show, leaving Vice left with only a bunch of nobodies, apathetically pumping out these endless, insipid documentaries on uninteresting or lukewarm faux explicit topics. The Vice that was once known for being the cutting edge of journalism is now a shadow of its former self, and in all likelihood, it's only gonna get worse from here.
Yeah, parking the money, that's what I'm saying. Dude, from the moment they invested in, okay, tell me that all the content they posted over all these years is worth $400 million. You're delusional if you think that it even comes even slightly close to even like 5% of that amount. You're losing your mind, my brother. You're losing your mind. It's worth $5 billion. Yeah, but a company value, predicted value, has nothing to do with how much they're spending on a new round of investments. What the fuck is, dude? I think I'm talking to like literally rocks. I'm looking at chat and I just see like a field. There's like 20 just rocks. It's just rocks, man. There's stones. Actually, stones, man. As long as money loses money, I don't care. Okay.